A lot of people, including me and a lot of wrestling experts, would say that ECW as Extreme Championship Wrestling really began when you threw the NWA title in the garbage. Could you just detail who came up with that idea and what the whole fallout was from that?
Yes, it was, I don't know if it was all Paul's idea or if it was Paul and Todd's idea. Paul called me a week or so before the tournament. We were still at that point, Eastern Championship Wrestling was still a member of the NWA. And at that time, we had started drawing those really strong houses, those sellout crowds, and I think we were only NWA member to be doing that in the States. So they wanted to do the tournament in the ECW arena and proffered the idea of having Shane Douglas, the ECW champion, become the NWA champion. And Paul called me and laid this idea out to me, which I remember vividly. Remember the first time that he told it to me, it sounded so wrong, like to do that, because it bled so much of the politics that I eschewed in the business. And but the one thing I'll say about Paul was he didn't call me and tell me I was doing it. Paul always gave me the option. He would say, we can do this or we can do this. And he would tell you the good and bad of this, and he would tell you the good and bad of this. It wasn't like he'd say, we can do this, which is going to be really great, or we can do this, which is going to suck, but it'll be okay. He would give you all points of view on equal footing. And through the course of the time, that week or two that it was leading up to the tournament, you can imagine in my head, I'm wrestling with this because I, had grown up a fan of the NWA and had huge respect for most of those guys that carried, if not all of them, that carried that belt. And I would go through this, I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it, I'm not going to do it. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I couldn't very well call my friends and say, hey, Paul's got this idea. So I was sort of stuck with this just on my own. And Wednesday before the tournament, Mike Tenay had a radio show, nationally syndicated radio show on, and he called me on Thursday and said, did you hear my show last night? I said, no. And he said, I think you got to go back and listen to the archive. I had Dennis Corluzzo on, and he didn't talk very kindly about you. To my knowledge, I'd never met Dennis Corluzzo. I had known the name only because the hotel where we're staying tonight, the first time I came into ECW, Eddie Gilbert had to run over there to pick up the check from him. And we drove over with Eddie, sat in the car, he ran in and came out. I didn't know what Dennis Corluzzo looked like. I had never met him as far as I had remembered. And why would he, if we're doing this weekend, it didn't make sense to me. So I went back and I listened, and Dennis Corluzzo, remember at this time, we were still making about 75% of our money on independents, about a quarter of ECW. So I listened, and he said in the interview, if anybody out there's thinking of hiring Shane Douglas, I wouldn't, because I can tell you at first-hand knowledge, Shane Douglas will take your deposit, not show up, and he'll screw you out of the money. And I had never done that to anybody, never. And I thought, why the fuck would he say that? That's the dumbest thing in the world. And at the time, I took it as an overt attempt to take food off my family's table. And it pissed me off. And I thought, so he's politicking on me now, and I don't even know the guy? So that's what the industry is. I've learned the politics. I know how to do them. I'm playing with the best of them. I just choose not to. So I still, of course, after listening to that pushed me towards, fuck it, I'm throwing the belt down. But then as I got closer to the day of doing it, I still had great reservations. I got to the ECW arena typically around 12:30, 1 o'clock on a TV day. And I walked through the back door, and this short, heavy-set, sort of odd-looking guy with a funny accent came walking up and shoves a contract in my face. Here, Shane, sign this, man. You gotta sign this, man. I said, who are you? And he said, I'm Dennis Corluzzo, man. Nice to meet you. And he's, I'm thinking, like, what's this guy doing in here, And so I looked at this thing. It's a legitimate contract. And he said, I got to sign it on the spot. And I said, first of all, I wouldn't sign a contract from God until my attorney reads it, Dennis. So I'll take it on and let my attorney read it. And he proceeded to follow me around the dressing room the entire night. at one point I came out of a toilet stall having taken a shit, and he was outside the toilet stall and ready to open the door. He goes, "Here, Shane, can you sign this man?" I was ready to knock him out. I was really getting pissed. I kept telling Paul, "Get him the fuck away from me, because if he keeps shoving that concert in my face, I'm gonna knock him out." And so finally Paul did his best to keep him away from me. I went and dressed under the stairs with Taz and Perry and the guys in I think Bam Bam and Chris. I don't think Bam Bam was there yet. Now I've got 3 matches in the tournament to get through. First with Taz, second with Malenko, and the third with Too Cold. And the building was hotter than hell. Extremely stifling hot, August night. And so I had to get through these matches, and I still hadn't committed to doing it. In fact, when I'm in the match with Scorpio, I know I've got to ultimately make a decision pretty quickly here, and I start doing the promo. And I never pre-planned or wrote any of my promos down. I just spoke off the mind. The whole time I was growing up with my dad was like a legitimate superhero. A World War II vet. A decorated hero in the war. He served under Patton's Third Army. 28-inch waist, 48-inch chest. I mean, that was Billy. There's a picture of him from World War II with holding an M60 machine gun and a carbine, and it just looks like G.I. Joe. And watching, he's like a legitimate superhero to me growing up. And he used to tell me from the time I was a kid, and I never knew what he meant. He used to say, "Son, you can always remember, you can walk with your feet on the ground like everybody else. You can soar with the eagles." And I go, "Okay, Dad. Yeah, it sounds good." No idea what he meant by that. And the moment in that promo where I stopped and I say, "Here we go, Dad." My dad had just passed away earlier, like a few weeks before. And when I told him, "Here we go, Dad," it was because I could feel my father's presence. And for the first time in my entire life, I realized what my dad was saying. You can go along and do what everybody else does and get what everybody else gets. Or you can take a chance to soar and perhaps do better. And that's when I threw the belt down. As I'm cutting through the promo, the only part of the promo I tried to memorize, not memorize, just I kept going over it in my head, was the long list of names of people that had carried that belt, because I didn't want to miss anybody. And after these 3 matches, I'm blown up and it's hot, and I'm trying to remember this promo, and I'm going through it, and luckily the audience starts hitting out names. And Dory Funk, and Terry Funk, the man that'll never die, and Fat Man Dusty Rhodes, and I'm going through it, and it almost lent to the credibility of the reality of the promo, because it was, you could see it wasn't a scripted thing.
Yeah. And
I hadn't yet made eye contact, and the reason I'm dragging this promo out is I'm still in my head going, "Do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it." My biggest hesitation to doing it had nothing to do with being nice or mean to Dennis Corluzzo. I didn't want any of those guys I had just mentioned to think that I was doing anything to shit on their legacy, because it was anything but that. And that's why I said that for a company that died 7 years ago, R.I.P. And that was the only hesitation I had. And as I'm doing that promo, if you watch closely, you'll see my head turn to the left, and Todd was sitting with Corluzzo and Bob Ortiz, our ring announcer, down at the front left corner of the ring. And I made eye contact with Corluzzo, and all I could hear in my head was, "He'll take your money and steal your money and fuck you." And that's when I said, "And he can all kiss my ass," and threw the belt right at him. Thank God it worked. There was no guarantee it would. There was every guarantee that more likely that the fans would go, "Fuck you, ECW and Shane Douglas." And luckily that more represented the FTW attitude that Taz talked about later at ECW that really set us apart from everybody else. But it could have easily been the epitaph to my career. Thank God it wasn't.
You mentioned that the NWA was dead 7 years before that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's still dead, but some people are trying to revive it now. What's your opinion of that?
To me, it's like you can't relive ECW. You can't bring ECW has been gone now for 18 years, 17 years, whatever it's been. I don't think like my kids grew up watching wrestling. They don't know what the NWA is. Yeah, there are a lot of fans out there that still do, but all those fans that do remember it also know that it died a long time ago, and that there's been multiple attempts at reviving it, and none of them work. But with that said, I think our business is in a very precarious place right now. I happen to be in it, thankfully, at a time when it went to levels that nobody could have ever seen coming. 48 to 50 million people per week watching wrestling, and the television, and the WrestleManias, and all these huge pay-per-views, and it was just like a nirvana that a guy like Bruno Sammartino could never have imagined in 1969 or 1970. So to have seen and been in at that time, and then now seen it reduced to 2 to 3 million fans per week for all intents and purposes. My obvious question is, I know ratings are down everywhere, but are they down 96% everywhere? Like, as the NFL used to be drawing 150s in the ratings, now they're only drawing 7s and 8s. I mean, because the wrestling industry is so totally down, and then you take in the fact that 2 of those companies are no longer even around anymore. It's one company that should be drawing even better ratings than they were before. And then when you understand the product that we do, you can see clearly how far it's gotten away from wrestling and to what Vince would call sports entertainment. So with that said, I would hope that the latest attempt to revive the NWA would have, if not great success, some modicum of success. I hope TNA with their new backers, Canadian backers, would get hot. I hope the Ring of Honor would suddenly nail a rating. I'd hope 5 more companies would start up and get hot. I want to see the kids that are in the business today have the same opportunities that I had back then. If, at first when I broke in with the territories, I could get told no 25 times, I still had a chance. Now you get 1 no and you're done. Unless you want to go, dabble around in the business. And how do you build a star dabbling around in the business? So I want to see the business get back to where it's some semblance of that must-see television. It used to be on, Tuesday morning, everybody at school was talking about, hey, did you see what happened on Raw last night? Or did you see what happened on Nitro last night? And then you had the replays. So I would hope that they'd all get hot again. The business, as great as the places that we had seen it go, I don't think anybody, Vince included, could imagine how much of that could be lost. So I agree. I think it's almost impossible to resurrect something. I don't know of any example where something in wrestling had been resurrected from that long ago.
And they can't erase the title holders that have held the NWA title. You were probably one of the last really credible ones.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the lineages since then, but I have read some of the names, and there's nothing on them, even if you Google the names. So
yeah, it's been a shame that what happened, because he had so many. I don't know each of the guys, and I don't want to disparage any of them, but there's been so many attempts, and every couple years we hear somebody else is going to resurrect the NWA, and the NWA is coming back. We all know the historic lineage of the NWA, and that will never be erased. All those legendary names. But to keep on saying Shane Douglas is going to buy it tomorrow, now Shane Douglas is NWA, and I'm going to rebuild it, and then after that it's yours, and then after that it's his, and after that it's hers. At some point you just have to say, let it go, and maybe try to build the next big thing. When Eastern Championship Wrestling became Extreme Championship Wrestling, I'm sure there were a lot of wrestling pundits at that time saying, ECW, what the hell is that? Nobody's ever going to get behind that. So there is something will become the next big thing. But I don't think it's going to be by resurrecting something from 2+ decades ago.